Now 4 in a row for the Broncos, who sit at an even 5-5. Hope coming to life where there once was none. Russell Wilson, 27 of 35 for 259 and a touchdown. Some costly giveaways on the Vikings side of the ledger in what was a 1-point final. Back in studio, Joe Musso alongside CBS NFL analyst Ryan Wilson. Ryan, this was a big game with big implications. We'll get to all of that, but let's stay in this 60 minutes and start on the winning side here with Russell Wilson, this Broncos team. It still seems like a defense leads to wins type team, but offensively, are you seeing a maturation? Where are you seeing things change and where have they been better?
Yeah, they weren't able to run the ball in the first half. That didn't change in the second half. 17 attempts in the first half for Russ Wilson. He ends up going 27 for 35. We saw the highlight there, the YOLO ball to Courtland Sutton in the end zone, the same thing that we saw last week, with much success because you throw it to your best player, let him out-leap the defensive back who's usually 3 or 4 or 5 inches shorter than he is, and then rely on your defense. That defense generated 3 turnovers. The first series was a weird play that ended up with a fumble with Josh Dobbs. We saw the Alexander Madison fumble, which has been a recurring theme this season for him, then an interception later by Josh Dobbs. The Vikings appear to have lost the magic, but whatever, that works out for this Vikings team, this Broncos team that is now 5-5. Last year was a complete unmitigated disaster to Nathaniel Hackett. We were questioning whether Russ Wilson had lost the juice. He's not cooking, and Joe, I don't think he will be cooking at any point going forward, but Sean Payton is managing him in the kitchen, so to speak. He's letting him do the things that he does well, but he's also not putting too much on his plate, and we've seen the success build week in and week out. They've now won 4 in a row, 3 games in a row. They've beaten Kansas City, Buffalo, and Minnesota in back-to-back weeks. You have to feel good about that if you're a Broncos team that now, I think, sits 9th in the AFC, 2 spots removed out of the final playoff spot. 1 spot behind the Buffalo Bills.
I know teams are not who they were a year ago, but 13-win teams from a year ago, 3 consecutive wins over such competition. Things are rolling in the right direction for Denver. You just said something about Minnesota, though, that I don't know if I take issue with, but caught my attention there. You spoke about this as a departure from all that magic, but how big of a derailment is this really when you have a team that just outgained their opponent by 100 yards in a 1-point loss with 3 giveaways? If they can clean things up, do they still look like a part of that playoff picture in the NFC wide open?
Absolutely, and they had 10 more minutes of possession than Denver did, and they were controlling this game until the turnovers became too much to overcome. You can't have 3 turnovers against 0 turnovers and expect to be competitive week in and week out. Josh Dobbs, this is the first series. Why are we throwing a pitch on 3rd down to Josh Dobbs? Is this high school? Like, I don't understand it. And then he takes a hit to the chops. He took several hits to the head throughout this game, and that's not what you want from your quarterback, who is going to be the quarterback for the duration. Alexander Madison, again, with another fumble, which has plagued him this season and plagued this offense and stalled the drive as it was moving. And then you see Josh Dobbs get hit here and leads to an interception that derails another drive and leads to points for the Broncos. So these are self-inflicted wounds, and I was saying to you earlier this evening, it's incredible the coaching job that Kevin O'Connell has done without Kirk Cousins. They lost Jaron Hall early on in that one start that he had against the Packers, and then you bring in Josh Dobbs after the trade deadline and have all the success, in part because the offense is playing well, in part because the defense is playing well. The defense bent and broke it at various points in this game, and the offense was plagued and eventually killed by these turnovers.
I find it very interesting. Playmakers, new quarterback, yes, but not the same cast of characters making the plays. We saw a lot of Jordan Addison in weeks past, at least with Kirk Cousins. We saw a lot of TJ Hockenson, and yes, that has been a through line no matter who the quarterback has been, but maybe we don't see as much of them in this game. I want to talk to you about a specific talent on the other side, that being the man we mentioned. Courtland Sutton appears to be the break glass in case of emergency here. Only 66 yards on 4 grabs in this game, but comes up in the biggest possible moment. Talk to me about that trust between quarterback and wide receiver and what we've seen these last 2 weeks.
This feels like Joe Musso college. You throw it to Joe Musso, let him make the plays, and let him do the heavy lifting, right? But here's the thing. Courtland Sutton, 6'4", and he's the biggest player on the field typically, especially when he gets to the secondary. All you have to do is run. This isn't hard. This isn't throwing a slant with a defender in your face. This is throwing a jump ball and letting your best rebounder go up and get it and get that rebound. We saw it last week. Oh, the toe touch tap in the end zone against the Bills. We saw it this week to put this game away eventually for the Broncos. And now he has 8 touchdowns this season, and it feels like he's coming to his own. We saw Jerry Jeudy had an opportunity for a touchdown earlier. The ball went through his hands. But you continue to build around the guys that are making plays. Sean Payton continues to dial up these plays. Even though the running game didn't get going, the defense hung in there, generated those turnovers we talked about, and gave them the opportunity to go Russ to Courtland at the end there in the fourth quarter.
Well, let's go straight to Russ, taking a look here at some numbers for Wilson, who has been known to be in these crazy, tight, zany games throughout his career. Zany, that's a throwback. Maybe back to the days when Russ was getting it done, and he gets it done in this spot. Fourth quarter comebacks, game-winning drives, tied for, or most on his own, excuse me, since entering the league in 2012. 39 game-winning drives, 31 fourth quarter comebacks. Ryan Wilson, when you think about Russell Wilson in these moments, do you still think about him the same way? I know we didn't. There was a departure with this comeback with Denver, but over these last couple weeks, it's looked more like Russell Wilson. Maybe not the gaudy numbers in the Seattle era, maybe not the deep ball and the prolific passing game vertically, but in this moment, still Russell Wilson.
Well, you're seeing glimpses, and I think Sean Payton is managing Russ Wilson to get him back at least close to the form that we saw in Seattle, close to the guy that the Broncos thought they were getting when they got him from Seattle before last season. Now, last season, as I mentioned, it was forgettable on a number of levels, cost Nathaniel Hackett his job. Sean Payton comes in and immediately makes changes, and part of those changes are managing the offense around Russ and not putting too much on him. We saw glimpses of the deep ball again tonight. One of the best deep ball throwers over the last 6-7 years. That had gone by the wayside in recent years, but we're seeing glimpses of that. We're seeing getting Courtland Sutton more involved. We're seeing the running game, which didn't work tonight, but typically Javonte Williams being able to help out in that regard, and of course the defense balling out. But I think Russ continues to build confidence, and it's hard to get a read on who Russ is when you hear him talk to the media, but you get the sense, and by just watching, he is playing with more confidence, and it feels like Sean Payton has more confidence in him. I think that's going to snowball in the right direction, snowball uphill, if you will, to butcher that analogy. But the point being that you're going to allow the Broncos to make this push. As I mentioned, they're right on the door, knocking on that final playoff spot. And this is where you want to be, especially after this slow start, winning the games they've won down the stretch. Now 4 in a row, which honestly, after the first month of the season, I don't think anyone saw coming.
Well, and that's exactly where I want to take you next, because we're talking about the defense that got 70 hung on them by the Miami Dolphins. So far a departure, and in the best way possible, where we are right now. Over this 4-game winning streak, the defense for the Denver Broncos, winning the turnover battle in a way that nobody in the league is right now. 11, plus 11 in the turnover differential over this 4-game winning streak. Next closest, plus 6, your Steelers. Not where I'm going with this, but I'm going to the defensive side of the ball for Denver. How do you fix it on the fly is a question we always ask. We've gotten the answer here for Denver, but what has led them to this point?
Well, you talked about Jordan Addison and his limited reps on Sunday night. 2 words, Patrick Surtain. And I think that's what happened last week against the Bills. Steph Diggs didn't have an opportunity to be a difference maker because of Patrick Surtain, and that's the starting point. He's one of the best players on that team. Justin Simmons is another great ball maker in the middle of that secondary, playing safety. They've gotten better up front in terms of guys getting after it. Nick Bonito. We've seen Jones making plays, and I think those guys are coming together. And we were having a conversation not too long ago about Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator, probably having to walk home from one of the losses. Like, you get a 70-burger hung on you, you're not taking the team plane home. But he's been able to turn the corner, get the most out of this group, and they're playing at a level we did not see in the first half of the season. And you talk about the turnover differential. That goes a long way in covering up the offensive blemishes that have yet to work themselves out as Russ and Sean try to get on the same page offensively. So you don't have to worry about scoring 35, 40 points a game. You can let the defense generate those turnovers, give you short fields. And look, they had 1 touchdown tonight. That was the yellow ball, as I like to call it, to Courtland Sutton. Prior to that, 5 field goals. So you're relying on Will Lutz to kick the field goals. Defense doing the heavy lifting. And then, Russ, we need you to make 2 or 3 plays down the stretch. And that recipe is working so far.
After that 70-piece in Miami, Vance Joseph said, "We will get it figured out, we promise." That's often a hollow promise, but not in this instance. Defense first in Denver right now. Let's take a look at the road ahead for Denver, because we are now talking about a contender in the playoff picture. We're going to take a look at that playoff picture later in the hour, but here's what the road ahead looks like for the Broncos. And it's going to be a defense-first matchup, one maybe the likes of what we just saw on the Browns schedule with, again, your Steelers, but two strong defenses going head-to-head back here a mile high. Then on CBS, they'll get C.J. Stroud's Texans, the Chargers. That's a big question mark. Who knows? The Lions, the Pats, the Chargers again before the Raiders. Favorable, in a word? Is that the way you look at this schedule?
So let's say you get 4 wins here, and that's, I would say that the over-under probably is 4, 3.5, 4, 4.5. If you get 4 wins here, you're to 9, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're in the conversation. Now, the AFC is much more competitive than the NFC, but there's going to be a conversation to be had about 9 wins and how far does that get you. And those are some relatively tough games. Defensively, perhaps on one side, the Chargers game, you have 2 more games against LA. Which team shows up there? Who knows? Raiders to end the season. That team is playing much better under Antonio Pierce. But the Broncos are no longer the homecoming opponent. They have proven over the last month that they can play with anyone and won some pretty impressive games. So I think you try to get the 9, maybe have a week, 2 weeks left, get 1 more, and you're going to be right there. I mean, no one saw this coming to the end of September.
A tip of the cap to Sean Payton and that coaching staff for getting things turned around, coaching the team to this point. But we do have just about 2 months remaining here. We're talking 7 weeks of football, and as you said, anything can happen. Let's see what's going to happen here for Minnesota as well as we take a look at their schedule. Bears, Monday Night Football, Week 12. Maybe that's a question mark after the effort that Chicago put forth against the Lions in this one. It's an any given Sunday league. You will get a Sunday off in 2 weeks, Minnesota and their fans. They also have the Raiders on that schedule. Bengals is a completely different question to be asked than it was a week ago. The Lions twice and the Packers sandwiched in between. Minnesota knows what it is to be in these moments, Ryan. They were there a year ago. How valuable is what the head coach and this team has been through together in this stretch run as you do try and remain relevant?
Yeah, I think Kevin O'Connell's experience last year was invaluable. You had Kirk Cousins, of course. On the defensive side of the ball, you have a bunch of veterans there, starting with Harrison Smith, that can certainly be leaders in that regard. But I think, again, they're at 6 wins now. You get to 4 wins, and you get to Week 18, which is a matchup against the Lions. Lions could be sitting people, so that could be in your favor as well. And again, 9, 10 wins in the NFC are much more attractive in terms of your playoff chances than in the AFC as we sit here currently, especially if you head into Week 18 with 10 wins or even 9 wins with the understanding that the Lions aren't going to play everyone because they're resting up for a deep playoff run themselves. So I think the Vikings are in good shape. The question going forward is, can Josh Dobbs maintain this? Because the reason he hasn't stuck with the team is because he's hit some highs and also hit some lows, and then you have to minimize the turnovers. You can't have the turnover differential be 3-0 when you dominate yards, dominate time possession, and find a way to lose a game like they did tonight.
Every week is an examination, and we are grading on a curve. These two separated by just 1 point on Sunday night, but it's the only difference that Denver needed. Ryan, thank you.